Good afternoon and most welcome to 722 of the H series. And I'm today smack in the nature, and we have a lovely snowfall falling down, temperature around 0, clouded sky. It's not too bad, the weather, for being December. I think it's the 10th of December today. And I would take up something that started as an inspiration much earlier, maybe 8 or 10 months ago, when we were discussing habits and routines. And I named this lecture Routines and Traits of the Mind. And my point will be somewhat different. And the foundational idea is mind as a black box. We heard different expression for that, depending on which philosopher it is. The bucket idea, I think it was Putnam who said that. Wittgenstein mentioned consciousness as a more or less representation of the world in Tractatus. There are different models for this, but I will stick with something I call the black box. And this is a box whose inside is unknown. It doesn't have an inside, or the inside is unknown. It's unclear. The box is shut out, and that, I would say, that is the reflective consciousness. We in Western thinking are stuck with the gestalt of the mind being a pure reflection, and the mind being nothing but a mirroring effect of what's around it. And to that is added often thoughts popping up somewhere from nowhere, but those thoughts are more or less some sort of complements. They are added and not really proper part of reality. The only serious part in some derived way is the reflection of the world. That's the only reality. And it's derived in that sense that the real reality is actually the objects. We have a tradition in the West to have a lot of problem talking about the mental side. The black box is more or less an unknown thing. When we speak about consciousness, we get an idea of almost nothing. It's reflecting, we say. It sees the world. And some people get a little bit mysterious and says, yes, it's a substance we don't know. And as you are very well familiar by now, it's something called the hard problem. And if you learn, read Chalmers or Churchland couple, or why not Daniel Dennett, consciousness is either a no thing or something absolutely mysterious, not of this world, and that's a very hard problem. I will take that into questioning. I'm not too sure that is actually accurate. And I would say a lot of problem is what we usually associate with terms like mental, psyche, mind, for instance. They often give associations to some sort of blank reflection of the world. Almost like something recording the world, video recorder of some sort, maybe like the one you are, whose effect you're seeing now, my old mobile. And this consciousness is a presumed, structureless, almost featureless nothing, or almost nothing. Sort of an extra substance to the world. We know it exists, but it will cease to exist the moment we die. Or it will pass somewhere else, like a airy soul fly away somewhere and end up in a container until doomsday and then get a body again. There are different models for that. And this Gestalt, I'd say, my idea is that that idea shuts off. It closes off this black box even more, becomes something unreachable, very far. It actually becomes dimmed out of knowledge, an area not to go into. It has become, I'd say, in modern Western world, the great unknown. And whereas we sail the oceans, we go into space to discover, to understand, we never go into consciousness ever. That direction is shut out. When we even go to consciousness, we go it as a black box, as it's something forever unknown. And this is, of course, a marginalization of the mind in this disjunction between objects and the black box. The objects are usually the prioritized part of the contradiction, of the polarization, whereas the mind is secondary. And this is really interesting, it's even secondary when it comes to perception. It's always, when you read books about perception, until recently I'd say, first is the world and then we perceive it. Beam of light comes from the outer world, it reaches our eyes and we process that and we make representation automatically almost, usually. And there's a time delay, so we're never in the moment. I really, really dislike this idea, always have something crooked about it. Something is not right here. I always thought that. And of course, this creates a lot of stuff that are very problematic. And that we discussed earlier, the paradoxes, but this is not what I'm thinking about. There are other, I'd say even weirder things going on here. But I'd say it's a real shame that the inner part is more or less or completely futureless. And I'd say it's not ephemeral. And I would say it's even not non-material. I'd say, and this is, I'm going to try to argue for, that it has traits, it has characteristics. Let's open this black box up. It has working principles, things to be learned during a lifetime, and it's an entire universe of interesting actual traits, real traits. And these parts can more and more be part of our knowing process. We can learn them, we can learn to understand the inner universe. And I'd say it's extraordinarily interesting as well. Extraordinarily interesting. I would say this whole model devalues mind completely, and I'd say it devalues both sides. Both sides get devalued. Mine more, of course, but also the other side. There is something greater behind. And it struck me, speaking of this, why is there so incredible little influence of from materialism, reductionism, in the eastern part of our earth, in East Asia? Understanding this will make it obviously clear. Reductionism and materialism can even be accepted in those countries, because for them objects it doesn't matter how real they are real for them, could be real for them, but there is something even more real, not dependent on reflective consciousness, because the objects are actually losing too. They are constructed in the process of the reflective consciousness. Without reflective consciousness can't really be any objects like this. And therefore, they, from an embodied person in balance, might be real, might be something to think about and know and everything, all to the degree we do in the West. Not a problem. But there is something much greater. And if you have that embodied, there won't be any much question. It's like choosing between a cup of proper coffee brewed with coffee from Kenya, as this is, and a cup of diluted instant coffee. People can argue to death that the instant coffee is better. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a zilch difference. And that's what reductionism is doing in the East. Nothing. It's not even a mosquito. Because you don't even have a progressive atheism in those countries. You don't have ideas of a soulless person. And you definitely have no widespread idea of us not having a will. That is not something, I'd say, that needs to be propagated as an idea that we have a free will. Because we have, it's not, you don't have to believe in it. As little as you have to believe there will be a sun tomorrow. I would say it even harder. It's even stronger than it will be sun tomorrow. Even if the sun didn't go up tomorrow, this would be surer because it's embodied. But that's the most general take. Let's get into the grits of the whole thing. And I would say this causes a lot of problem on a daily basis, because we don't have any good words for the contents of this black box. Because it's a black box, why create words for it? We don't create much words about the social lives of the trolls, because they don't exist usually, we say. We don't construct much details about unknown animals in the oceans. They might exist. And even more so, we don't construct much characteristics of the idea in the Platonic world, in the world of ideas. It's a problem with Plato there, because we don't interact with the ideas. They are bound to be rather meek. I would say even completely useless, but we can push it that hard, okay. But we need to understand this principle because it's the founding principle. It's not to be ignored. Consciousness is full of traits. You can learn it and you will learn, and thereby developing both sides. The world will not be the same. The world is our attention of it. And I had to quote Ian McGilchrist. The attention of the world is incredibly important. It's morality, it's how you feel, and that's how you treat everyone else. Little bit like that he said in an interview on YouTube, and I have to agree, it is enormously important, the inside. And this is the information that also help us to inform our choices and action in the outside, but also to develop spiritually, because there cannot be a spiritual development if it's a black box. And that's a major problem with the Hellenic thought of discarding the body and the material. You threw out the baby with the bathwater, you also discard this side. And you end up with a rather bland consciousness / soul / spiritual, where indeed it is incredibly vivid, real, important, like nothing else, because that decides everything. And I'd say it's not non-material, it's not ephemeral. And even so, even then, I'd say even it can be controlled by will. It's not out of our hands. The usual model, usual gestalt, it's out of our hands. We're just passive observer. We might as well throw the towel in, as I think Floyd Patterson did against Ingmar Johansson. And it's giving up somehow, unnecessary, completely unnecessary, because this is a construction. Well, it's a gestalt, of course, it's an image. We can find in the black box some knowledge of how we work as individuals as well, which is even as important. Understand how we work, which, as was mentioned the other day by Kalle, my dear colleague, that you need to take a break in the afternoon, or at least do something else, because that's the tired part. I don't think when you have this black box idea that you will listen to that much in that case. I just spoke to somebody yesterday, and she said that she used to have an attitude in working life that I work until the day I die and then I can rest. I think this is caused by this idea. You don't see where everything is coming from, the source of everything. You don't even perceive to be interesting. And to be good people, we need to take control of our attention, that Ian McGilchrist suggested. I think that's incredibly important, because That's the morality, that's ethics. If you don't control that, you might well throw moral ethics out of the window as well. And that's what happened, I'd say. And this is the connection to routines and traits. And this is the ideas I got the seed from James Clear, Kahneman and Hicks. Hicks, not to be forgotten. I can really recommend him to read some resume of him or some of his smaller papers. And it is that routines and habits are very close to what the mind is. It's an action, it's a verb. And we need to control what the verbs are doing. Take conscious control of our doings. And therefore the routines, therefore the habits. And I'd say the black box is not a thing that has the habits. I think the habits and the routines are the outer shell of what consciousness really is. This is something you can observe, something you can learn from. How do you establish a habit or a routine? How do you establish the routine of keeping order, for instance? It takes a while, and you will change in the process. For every time you change your routine and habit, you are changing your attention. You are changing the world. If the world would have been stable, like in this gestalt, why change? Well, maybe to gain some diminutive reflective consciousness gain for the ego or something like that, but it would be vastly less inspiring. It wouldn't give half or 1/10 of the inspiration to do anything. Nothing, I'd say. Really little. And take this common knowledge that is disappearing now. I made some research to this lecture and asked people, how do they work? How do they sit at the desk and work? Some people say that they interrupt their work for everything. And we have so many interruptions today. Emails coming in, SMSs, or somebody knocking on the door. So they work constantly and let the different messages and emails interrupt them. And they don't even know that that's destroying everything. That's complete disruption of everything. Everything what is an intention, an action verb. We work for maybe 40-45 minutes and then we take a break. It's more or less the same in the whole civilized world. That's what we do. And we don't let us get interrupted during those 45-50 minutes, could be an hour. We don't allow interruptions. For every time you do that, you will diminish your attention a little bit. Not noticeable the first time, will be noticeable within 6 months, and within 3 years it will have destroyed you. That is no longer knowledge, but that is how we used to do. That's burning focus. We don't even have a proper word for focus. Focus is something that pertains to the black box. The only thing you can do is write it on the outside of the black box. There you can write focus or something, concentration. But it won't penetrate the inside. It's even to that case that the reflective consciousness creates its own knowledge out of nothing, out of no experience, no time, no space. And I'd say this is very much comparable to the rationality when it came to us in the Enlightenment time, when it was at its worst, really the worst. Because, for instance, guys like Robespierre or Marat, for that matter, did they care anything about the results of their actions? Never. Did they even look into the nation of France, their reality? No. It was not informed by reality, because the reflective consciousness invents knowledge here and now. And that's the reason why sweeping all the traditions out, they're useless, because the reflective consciousness can think about anything. So that's how it works. Instead of going into the black box, explore the universe within, we just stand knocking on the door and we write something hazardous by chance, and it's the reflective consciousness that is actually this process of making consciousness into an object, making the corporal intake into an object. I had a look into this when it came to pain treatment. Yeah, you hear that. It's covering all strands of knowledge. But in pain treatment, if you do this to pain, it will be really, really bad, really bad. Because if you don't experience pain, it grows on you. And trust me, your body will experience it. Reflective consciousness doesn't cover anything of what's the whole of us, or true self, our big self, if you like, or as the Indian said, Atma. In pain treatment, you need to penetrate the pain. You need to go into the pain, and thereby you find relief, not by shutting it out. So even in pain, reflective consciousness is problematic. It's, in a way, our not wanting to feel anymore and thinking that's a solution, like Plato and Aristotle did. Shut out the body and go into transcendental. This is not happening to me. Like the three monkeys in Hakuin. See no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. That's the reflective consciousness, shutting out everything. And I think that's at the heart of this process. Isn't it amazing what the reflective consciousness is producing? Is thought to be the most real thing in the Western world. It's a little bit like believing that the only real thing with the car is its tires and the rest of it's unreal. It's nonsensical. It's no wonder sometimes they're actually laughing at us for that incredible mistake. Because it makes us unknowing, and it puts us in a position where we shut out that part and the object part and the whole part, and we continue to shut our body out. We cannot understand the world if our body is not in balance. That's the zest of it. That's a full stop there. That's how it is. The more you balance up your body, the more of reality you can understand. And the more you will feel, the more you will perceive, the more you will grow. With no balance, there is no thinking either. Cannot be any thinking. Can only be the reflective consciousness doing its metabolism, for lack of a better word. Very simple metabolism. And metabolism, that is actually the metabolism, I would say, of N2, T2 as well. The muscle groups that are responsible for the fear, flight reaction. This is a flight reaction from reality. The action we will take after that are the actions we take in modern world. They are uninformed, haphazardous, not having any depth to them. The results will be equal to the depth of knowledge. There's no getting around that. We will fail, and as I mentioned in the previous, for the person, for the individual, that would mean that they get them into a worse state. The only thing that reflective consciousness is constantly reinvent itself, make it new every single time. For each object there is a new reflective consciousness. There is just a mirroring, and there is no connection between the mirroring. It's disjunction. It's a bit like modern fashion. Every new year it's a new trend. There is nothing stable. There is no perceivable soul. It's disjunct. Spread out moments without a unifying core. This is linear time. It's not connected. I think that's the most gruesome trait of the linear time. And of course, for reflective consciousness, the very idea that consciousness has structure is absurd, and that consciousness has traits, order, and space is blocked out. And therefore, we don't have, for the first, not a common knowledge of how we should go about doing things in the consciousness. How not to get distracted, how to strengthen our sleep, how to strengthen our positive emotions. That's blocked out. That's traditional knowledge we do no longer listen to. Instead, we each time invent something new. Reflective consciousness is this inventing process. New solutions, and we feel utterly empty. Lack of real life. Lack of depth in reality. We don't have any contact with the objects that surrounds us because we invent them subjectively. And now I'm saying subjectively in the sense of the reflective consciousness. And this is rather scary even. Those cognitive tests that exposes people to rooms that are first presented to them and then some stuff is taken out. They see that stuff that's taken out still, even if it's not there anymore. That's the reflective consciousness. Isn't that scary? It's not even there. How present are they both in the world and in themselves? Zilts. I start to think about these new age people. Some of them, I remember one especially. He did at the same time make popcorn in his house, took care of one kid and was watching the television at the same time reading a book. Everything crashed. It was popcorn everywhere. The kid ran away and he didn't pay any attention neither to the TV or the book. And one asked, apparently, he said, nothing's happened. The reflective consciousness, it doesn't understand itself. It doesn't understand a process. It doesn't understand that something is developing, because everything is a new moment. That could be the worst trait of the reflective consciousness. It doesn't have anything to it. It doesn't have a substance or anything. It is non-permanent. In a very literal sense, disjuncted. It is coming from something greater, and so are the objects. And I say all sort of principles, just give me an example here. I will come up with more examples. This is a rather new term for me. But I can give you some examples. For instance, we used to have in our parliament a very traditional opening by the hussars. They stepped in. If you want to give an explanation to this, I don't think that would even be necessary. Let me give you an explanation. You calm down, you got unified, because everybody's silent. Listen to this. I'm talking about consciousness now. And you get better prepared to do what you're going to do in the coming half year. It's unifying the people in the parliament. It makes them stronger, and it gives more intention in the long run. You see the continuity from the 17th century. It's been going on so long. They took it away. It was utterly destruction. Reflective consciousness think, take it away, it's unnecessary. They were taking away the most important thing for making good decisions. This destruction of knowledge has been going on for a while, and people are only able to pinpoint the most obvious cases, like they tear all down the buildings. 70% of all the buildings in Sweden has been teared down. I'd say that's rather superficial. What we do on and have done on a deeper level, and I have an example I discussed the other day. We used to have two forms of addressing people. We have a common you, do, and we used to have a ni. And I'm 100% sure those different things served a purpose, because then been growing for a long time, developing for a long time. The reflective consciousness in its stupidity thought, well, we're going to make the world better, take away the more reserved expression, ni, used in formal ways, and people are given to get more chummy and happy with each other. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Actually, the reasoning behind that. How autistically superficial can anyone get? I don't even believe. There's no depth to people. What they took away was the informal, loving, compassionate view. And people can't even hear the tone of voice anymore, because everything in perception is shut out. We become empty shadows without feeling inwards. And I think that could be a cause of a critique. I would say is a misnomer, a critique against language. Some philosophers doing that. It's really wrong to attack language. It's nothing wrong with language. Nobody can hurt language, but it's the reflective consciousness that's trying to make language poorer by changing it, but it cannot be changed really. The new words that are formed by the reflective consciousness is a process of thinning out knowledge, yes, but language is too stable to be really hurt. It's not a problem with language, it's a problem with trying to thin it out. And it's no good solution stopping to talk, or stopping to verbalize or intellectualize. Not at all. That's really barking up the wrong tree. And I say that barking up is coming from the reflective consciousness. No, it is this idea of making everything superficial. That's already in the Gestalt. And this needs to be understood in this more principled way, but also in a bodily way. Because when you come back to balance together with this, because it's both sides, and the body is always more integral. It's always already there in the world, always non-dual if you like, and it has a connection to consciousness. The body is consciousness, and in Eastern culture it's the body that transmigrate. The whole system, not only an ephemeral soul somewhere, it's the whole body that goes to the next level. Reincarnation is a rather not fitting word for what they mean by that. It's not something ephemeral that enters into a new body really. It's more complicated or more encompassing than that. I think we're losing the zest of it. We're losing the juicy part by shaving off everything that the reflective consciousness think is sticking up and not being completely homogeneous in this deluded fantasy, because this doesn't even become more homogeneous or anything like that. It's delusion in the bottom of the process, lack of knowledge, we'd say. Lack of knowledge causes these things, and in a way this could also be a great source of learning how it works. So this is not criticizing the regeringsreform or whatever we did, well, loads of them, because this can actually help us to understand the process. And we need to understand. Once we're starting to understand, we can get more into our bodies. Isn't that great? So we learn also from no knowledge or little knowledge. Yeah, well, it's quite enough there, I think, more than enough. I say thank you very much, it was a pleasure, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Bye.